Hey everyone, my name is Ben Chaish, and this is the Sony 50mm f1.2 G Master, and it might be my favorite 50mm lens. Let's check it out. So, full disclosure here, I am at the Sony Condo event. For what it's worth, definitely don't have like a partnership with Sony or anything, but they did have a big case of loaner equipment that they obviously are letting us borrow if need be. So for what it's worth, this is definitely not a sponsor video, but obviously I'm here, and so Sony is giving me the opportunity to use this stuff. They have no idea I'm making this video or anything, and it's definitely not part of any agreement. I'm just here and have been wanting to talk about this lens for a long time, and since I have it in my hands and have a tiny bit of time off, figured now would be a good time to talk about it. I'll also say that I brought a tripod here, but didn't want to like look weird carrying around a tripod for some reason. Some of these little woods, and maybe I'll film this. It's on a tree. I have my strap set up there, and so it's a pretty funny setup, so I'll actually have to film this real quick. So yeah, pretty ridiculous. But anyway, so this is a pretty decent sized lens, but for a fast aperture 50mm, it's definitely not any bigger than I would be anticipating. It's definitely smaller than the 50 1.2L that I used to use on my Canon setup, and then would, adapt it across the board. Now, as far as build goes, for those of you who aren't super familiar with the whole Sony ecosystem, this is part of their G Master series, so it's, their top of the line, full professional stuff. So it's built like a tank. It has two programmable buttons here, a AF/MF switch, and it has a ability to de-click and click the aperture. So if you're doing video, you can de-click it and have smooth transitions between your apertures, making that pretty easy. But if you're like me and you clearly use this as a photography lens, having those clicks makes it a lot easier. And something else I don't hear people talk about a bunch is that you have the ability to change the aperture here, but you can also just use any of these lenses, toss it on this A mode, and then it will simply allow you to use something like this front dial here to adjust the aperture. So kind of gives you both options with those preferences. Personally, I love being able to adjust it manually, just like a lot of my vintage lenses, so that's where I go. Now, I don't know the exact weight off the top of my head, but it's definitely not a lightweight lens. But for, again, a fast aperture with a very great autofocus motor type of lens, it's pretty much what you would expect or smaller. I will say that it is wide enough here that if you set the camera down without some sort of grip or anything, it does, it's like deeper here than the body is itself. So kind of an odd thing, but definitely not something I'm going to complain about. And for me, who is I'm over 6 feet tall and have fairly large hands, I have tossed a grip on here because it's just a lot easier because my pinky can then have a place to go. Otherwise it goes underneath. So especially for a lens that is a little bit heavier, but not overly heavy, buying just like a simple little grip thing like this can be something that you might want to look into. As far as size go as well, obviously it's pretty compact for being an f1.2 lens, again, that has autofocus. It has 72mm filter threads, which generally means it's a pretty small lens. An interesting thing to note, and I do want to dive in and learn a lot more about optics, but it has like a concave, I guess, front element here, which I very, very rarely see. So you see it kind of dip down in this way. And I don't know what kind of stuff that they use to make the images that they do, and I don't know why that exists. I would love if someone told me in the comments, but that is just kind of an odd thing to note. But if they need to do that to produce the images that this thing makes, it is totally worth it. So let's jump in and see some of the images that I've made over a bunch of weddings, and we can, I guess, talk about the results. other favorite 50mm lens is my manual focus Leica M mount 50mm f1.4 Summilux, the spherical newest version. But I will say, out of all of the modern mirrorless lenses, this lens does give you that same kind of magic. It's definitely not in the clinical sense where you just think everything's boring. The bokeh is really interesting and, I don't know, really soft at the same time. I haven't seen a lot of chromatic aberration or issues with that. It seems like the profiles both in camera and just on Lightroom and stuff do a fantastic job of getting rid of any imperfections that it might have as far as distortion and all that stuff. So I'm sure this lens may have those things, but all of the software that's built into the ecosystem of both Sony and then in Lightroom, which I use, has done a really good job of just combating that. So I see zero issues with that at all. So as someone that definitely has lots of cameras and lots of lenses, is it something I'm going to pick up? I would say currently, my two favorite lenses in the Sony system for how I do things are the 24 and the 50. I think that is a fantastic combo. The 35 is amazing as well, but I think for my wedding stuff outside of the things that I don't already have, the 24 and the 50 are gonna be the first lenses that I buy. And since I have the 20 and it does, similar things to what the 24 can do, this is probably going to be my first photography only purchase, and pretty stoked about it. I would also love to borrow this again sometime and directly compare it to my 50 Summilux, because I think that would be a really interesting comparison for a lot of people like myself that see the Leica stuff as just very like whimsical and inspiring and all that kind of stuff. And the perception that I had of Sony before kind of buying an FX3, and now I own this A7 IV, and it's not stuff that Sony's giving me, it's stuff I bought with my own money, is that this lens is giving me a very similar output. Sticking the Summilux images side by side with this is a video I really want to make. So if you're interested in that, let me know your thoughts below. And I'm definitely considering this, even though I already have that Summilux, because just with weddings and the fast-paced nature and everything, I'm really good at manually focusing on Leica cameras, but the face tracking and everything on the new Sony mirrorless bodies is just ridiculous. And so there are definitely times where this would be incredibly beneficial for me. So it's 100% something that would fit into my toolkit pretty well. So thanks again, everyone, and I will see you all on the next one.